It's Toronto's podcast on the Canada's Podcast Network.
Michael, welcome to Canada's podcast. Great to have you here. I think, in our little preamble, which was really, really cool, I think we're going to take a little bit of a different spin. You're very entrepreneurial. I know that, having talked to you. But for the entrepreneurs that are here, I think Mike brings a little different spin to it. He's one of those, once we've built something and it looks like it's going to start making money, how the hell do we realize it? And sometimes we're technologists, sometimes we're this, sometimes we're that, but we're not necessarily the guys that line up all the dots and make the things happen. Whereas, Michael's background is both as an experienced and I would say an early stage CEO who has to be entrepreneurial, but it's kind of a good way to talk about, not messing it up, knowing when to bring somebody in to make it successful versus take it down curves that it shouldn't go. The dreadful pivot scene, which happens way too much, kind of thing. But for our audience, just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, your background, why you've arrived, where you've arrived, kind of thing.
Sure. So I'm by academic background, I'm an electrical engineer. I did my MBA after that and then did a professional logistics designation. So a good fit for this business. I've worked mostly in large companies such as Motorola, Alcatel, Schlumberger, where I was the president, Yahoo, where I was the president. And prior to this role, I was president of Staples Business Advantage, which was the B2B side of Staples. So I would say fairly broad experience. Every company I've been to has been a completely different industry, which is an interesting perspective to bring because you bring a little bit of expertise from a broad range of vertical markets.
Interesting. So do you count yourself as an entrepreneur, or do you not count yourself? I'm just curious, try and get this synergy going between entrepreneurs and the operations side of the business.
So I would say that I have the characteristics of the entrepreneur, but I've got the 30 years of experience working for large companies, and I can balance understanding what it takes to bring a small startup to a full-scale company and driving revenue and ultimately profitability and all the things and processes and procedures that are needed, but also being cognizant of not wanting to bring the bureaucracy and silos and these sort of things which are cliche from large companies. So bringing the best practices from large companies and the discipline and the governance and these sort of things, but without slowing down a company that's small and needs to stay nimble.
Okay. So, maybe with where you are, maybe you can sort of give a little bit of perspective of when it's time to kind of pull that lever and say, I need somebody else. Sure. Are there any kind of warning signs that you've found that would suggest that? I think, actually, before you answer that, tell everyone a little bit about the company you're in, because as I was just saying to you, I mean, the technology is important, but it's definitely a change industry that you're in. The technology is there, but so tell us just a little bit about where you're sitting and the company you're in.
Sure. So the company is called Drone Delivery Canada, and we are a drone logistics company. So it's not just about the drone. We sell a full turnkey drone delivery logistics infrastructure solution. And we've got drones and depots they fly between and the software that brings it all together. So it's a real full turnkey system. And when I started with the company, basically the technology, or the first phase of the technology had been developed. Regulatory approval was received for one of the 4 drones in our fleet. So I think the founders, who are still with the company in varying roles, one of them, there's 4 founders, one of them was actually the CTO, obviously intimately involved in the technology back then and still now. They felt that the technology was at the point where we could now start thinking about going to market. Technology was in place, regulatory approvals were in place. What do we need to do to go get customers? And once you've got customers, you need to start hiring employees so you can execute and building all the processes and HR and finance and project management and health and safety and these sort of things. So really, I think the trigger, for the founders was technology's done, ready to go to market. So let's bring in somebody who can take us to market, who understands all those functions.
Okay, so you told me that there were 12 to 14 people there when you arrived. I mean, on an organizational level, without being too siloed, I mean, what does someone like you look to do organizationally?
So the first thing I did was obviously understand the business and the industry and that sort of thing and where we wanted to go, talking about what their vision was and make sure that vision made sense. And their vision needed to be tweaked a little bit. They need to inject a little bit of reality to it, because not every entrepreneur is necessarily grounded in reality. Sometimes they're visionaries and dreamers, which is good. It's not a bad thing, but sometimes you need to dial that back and inject some reality into it. So my first tasks were really to build out a strategic plan. How are we going to go to market? Who is our customer? What markets are we going to go to? What is the org chart going to look like today? What's the org chart going to look like tomorrow? What supporting functions do we need, like HR, finance, occupational health and safety, sales, marketing, and these sort of things. So really building a strategic plan was day one. They had done that to a certain extent because we'd IPO'd and they done that with shareholders.
Yeah.
More of an operating strategic plan is what I did first.
Versus a financing strategic plan, which is not necessarily the same. It's a big opportunity. Where do you see yourself and see the company in the next 5 years? Does it stay in Canada? Does it go global? That kind of thing.
Sure. So over the last year, I've been with the company about a year and a quarter, a little more than that over the last year. So we have done the strategic plan. We've built out all the departments that we needed, and we fully commercialized the business, and we started to sign customers with our commercial partner that we signed, Air Canada, last year. So now we're implementing. We've implemented our first customer, which is actually going to go live probably a week from now. So this interview is exciting. Yeah. very, very exciting. It's our first implementation to be our first revenue. So, where the company is going to go over the next little while. So we're not just building the company, we're actually building the industry. I don't want to sound arrogant or naive, but I would say we're the leader in the drone delivery market globally. Despite some of the smoke and mirrors.
Some big names there, Amazon, FedEx, they're both there.
A lot of YouTube videos that are smoke and mirrors and that sort of thing, but ours is grounded in reality. I've made sure of that, and so we're going to market. So where the industry is going to go, first of all, the regulations really dictate what you can and can't do. So we've got regulatory approval. We're allowed to fly anywhere in Canada, working with Transport Canada. And there are certain rules we need to follow. But within those rules, we can do whatever we want, coast to coast. So now the applications are typically going to be either remote communities, First Nations communities, or rural, or even suburban, and are going to be mostly business, B2B applications.
Okay.
And the next phase of what you will see will start to move into suburban and then urban B2B applications, and then eventually you'll see consumer applications. So a lot of the videos you see from Amazon and Google and others about dropping off a coffee or a sandwich to somebody's rural home in Australia, that's nice. They make for a great YouTube video. The business model is really not there today, but it will be one day. So it's B2B, then it's consumer, and then ultimately down the road, which is still 5+ years away, you're going to see people flying in unmanned taxis, but that's a while away. So that's kind of what you're going to see over the next 10 years.
Okay. What do you see as the biggest challenge in the future as CEO of what is still an entrepreneurial startup? Let's not kid ourselves.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we're still implementing our first customers right now. So it's still maybe it's not startup, but it's still, in that nascent phase of the industry and the company still being new. So, I would say my personal challenge is my not wanting to say no. And I think that's a good lesson that everybody needs to learn. And I always say, my little saying as a joke is, if you chase 10 rabbits, you're going to catch none. So, for something that's interesting and nascent and cool and sexy like our business, we get a lot of inquiries, and it's difficult to say no because some of those potential customers are big customers willing to write a check, but it might not be the right fit for what you want to do, what you want to do today, what your vision is. So being able to say no is a little bit of a challenge. So that's my personal obstacle. I would say the company, I don't know if it's really an obstacle. It's we live in a regulatory framework, just like pharmaceuticals or healthcare or anything like that. It's regulated as it should be. Mm-hmm. Some think the industry is not moving forward fast enough. I think it's moving at the right pace, but we can't move any faster than what the regulations are. So from a technology point of view, I've got my largest drone is a Condor. It can take 400 pounds. So I could easily fly somebody from where I am in Vaughan to downtown Toronto. So the technology is there, but I can't do that within the regulatory framework. So we've got to sort of move at that pace.
So you've worked in big companies as well as this sort of more entrepreneurial environment. When faced with kind of those unexpected challenges, how do you normally deal with them? Do you have have you kind of worked out a process? It's always good to hear this because you learn, our listeners learn so much from others in terms of, hitting those challenges. People have numerous ways of dealing with it.
Sure. I mean, and I've worked for some big companies. I was president of, Schlumberger in Canada, which is a big oil and gas company, and, a couple 100,000 employees globally, and you build a business plan and you can stick to it. Or other businesses like Staples, where I was, which is a fairly mature business, and you can do a forecast and a plan, and it's probably going to be accurate plus or minus a couple percent. For us, we tend to say, we're going to stick to the plan, but it's very different in a small company, especially multiplied by the fact that we're in a new industry. So although we've got a plan, we tend to refresh that plan on a regular basis, at least quarterly, because new things happen, regulations change. What we're seeing in the world with coronavirus is a perfect example. We are a perfect use case for what's happening right now. And we've had,
I was thinking that when I was looking through, doing my research. Yeah.
And as of today, we've gotten inquiries from medical authorities saying, can we use drones to deliver, drugs to people who are at home, or blood tests and these sort of things, and we can. So that's not part of our plan, but we need to be able to pivot and be nimble, which I think a small company can do better than a big company. So we tend to say, stick to the plan, but we know the plan is pretty fluid, as is the industry. So,
okay. What's your biggest challenge in the future then?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're well financed. We've got the right people. We're publicly traded. We're well respected in the investment community. We're well respected globally for our technology. We've got a great relationship with Transport Canada. So I don't really think there's any major obstacles other than, and I hesitate the word obstacle, but other than really just the pace of which the regulations are moving forward. I do think they're moving forward at the correct pace. But like I said earlier, the technology that we have can allow us to do more than what we're allowed to do. So we just need to move at that pace.
So let's just kind of cover some things. So if you could go back in time, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
My 20-year-old self, that's interesting. I don't know that I would have changed a lot. I'm pretty happy with my career. I think I'm 55 now, so that's 35 years ago. A lot's changed in then.
Mm-hmm.
Bought some different stocks or whatever. But yeah. I would say I don't know that I would change much. I think I learned some lessons along the way. I've had some good coaches. I've always worked with industrial psychologists for myself and my team to make us self-aware. So I think I've learned a lot of good lessons along the way. I think one mistake that that people make, and I have made, and many years ago, is remembering it's not just about the numbers. There are people behind the numbers. Recognizing the people and the culture. I think we tend to underestimate people who are maybe a little lower in the organization, who are not privy to everything that's going on, that they need to be recognized.
Yeah.
They need to feel a sense of accomplishment and their objectives, how they move the company forward. So these are some of the lessons I learned along the way. So being an engineer, I tend to focus on the numbers, but the people
So with that in mind, thinking about those coaches and various other things, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Interesting. I would say just remember the people behind the numbers. Like I said, I mean, it's really easy, especially if you're in the tech space. You're focused on the technology. Yeah. And I'm stereotyping, and I can do that because I'm an engineer. But engineers, and if I just stick to tech companies, engineers and tech people aren't always the ones who are focusing on the people. It's easy to get tied up in the technology, get tied up in the financials, get tied up in the capital markets and these sort of things. But you need to take care of the employees, and they will take care of the customer, which is what's going to take care of the company. So whatever way you want to say that, there's a lot of other sayings that are not mine, like strategy eats what is it? The execution, was it? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I think that was.
I think that's fair. That's fair.
So if you focus on the culture, if you focus on employee engagement and attraction, retention, I think the other things will be part of the picture.
Maybe the end of that should be and improves execution as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If you just some rapid fire questions, so you don't have to spend too much time. If you weren't doing what you do for work now, what would you be doing instead?
I think I've always been interested in technology as an engineer. So I think it would be something in the tech space. I think I've always looked for something that was unique. Like I said earlier, every job I've taken has been a completely different industry. So I always like to try something new, and this is pretty new. So I think it'd be something in the emerging market space.
Okay. What books are you currently reading, listening to, and what books would you recommend to the audience?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that, because as a small company, we've got some managers who are very new to management. They might have a small team, like 4, 5, 6 people. Mm-hmm. Might be their first management job, and I always go back to some of the older books in terms of what's one of them called? Crucial Conversations. Things about coaching people, about taking care of your team. There's a book a long time ago. It's very old, called Gung Ho, which is sort of some parables and analogies about taking care of your people. That's what I typically recommend to new managers. Myself, I'm typically reading Harvard Business Review because it's got a very, very broad perspective. It could be technology, it could be culture, it could be what's happening today with coronavirus. So I tend to read Harvard Business Review, but for my new managers, it's usually something about how to engage with your employees.
Okay. Are you a morning or a night person?
I am definitely a night person. I wake up reasonably early. I tend to prefer to work at home just to avoid the traffic, and then get in mid-morning, early morning, and then work late. So I'm definitely a night person.
Okay. If you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would it be and why?
I would say inquisitive. I always my whole life I've always liked to try new things and ask the tough questions and really explore the new things. That's why this job I'm in now is a great fit.
What's keeping you up at night these days? Apart from COVID-19.
Yeah, we're all in isolation. I don't know. I mean, I don't worry about my, just talking to you about coronavirus. I don't worry about my health so much because I'm doing the proper things. Our employees are doing the proper things. We put protocols in place. What I really think about, and just to focus on what's going on around us, because I worry about the little guy and how he or she are going to be impacted. The big companies and even companies our size, we will weather the storm. It's the guy who is the taxi driver, it's the restaurant, it's the guy who's selling hot dogs in Italy to the tourist that's not there anymore. Those people are going to have a tough time.
Yeah, my team was just talking about that. We're actually going to do an initiative a little bit on for entrepreneurs. So just to help them through, give them some ideas from others, basically. So, moving on to a little bit more fun note. What's your most favorite place in the world?
I've been to 57 countries, so I would say.
Well, then you've seen a lot, so.
I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, unfortunately. The favorite place that I've actually ever visited was Chernobyl. A friend of mine who's a photographer, and I'm also a photography enthusiast, who went there a few years ago to photograph Chernobyl, actually on the 30th anniversary of the disaster, which was in 1986. So I found that to be one of the most interesting places I've visited.
Okay. What are your three non-negotiables during the day? What things, and they don't have to be business negotiables, just, Mike's not happy if these things don't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own value system that I live by and these sort of things. But, there's a lot of stuff I want to not see in the office. I hate silos, especially in a small company, and you could have two people and you've got politics in a silo. So, I mean,
I guess you grew up with silos in large companies.
I'm just saying, I mean, large companies have silos, but small companies do. But I just hate silos. I hate politics. And I just want people to own it and be accountable. So those are the kind of, things I listen for and look for throughout my day when I'm talking to people or even on my own tasks.
Well, the last question is a bit of fun that I have, and it's very, very topical because it's kind of a social isolation question. Okay, so there's a small tropical island in the middle of the ocean with only one phone booth, no internet. We drop you off there with no technology at all. At any time, you can use the phone booth on the island to call the boat to come and pick you up. How long do you last before making the call? And what would you do until then?
Am I alone or is my wife with me?
No, you're on your own.
Does she know that I'm there? Because that would be
I have no.
To let her know that I'm there, and me and Wilson are okay. If everybody knew I was there, or the people that I cared for knew I was there, like my mother and my wife and that sort of thing,
yeah,
I would probably spend a fair bit of time there. I haven't had much alone time or even vacation time in the last little while. It's just been very hectic with work, so I can see myself spending a fair bit of time. I think the trigger for me to pick up the phone is when I am tanned enough that I can't tan anymore. Then I would pick up the phone. I'm done.
That's great. I haven't had that one before. That's good. So, Canada's podcast is really, entrepreneurs listening to other entrepreneurs, people thinking about being entrepreneurs. So we always like our listeners to be able to connect with who we interview without being, too intrusive or anything. But how can listeners find you online? Maybe throw you a question. It's amazing. Some of these things, people want to follow up on.
Sure, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Just Michael Zahra, Zahra on LinkedIn, and you can add me there. And I'd be happy to engage if somebody has questions. Other than that, if they want to learn more about our company and what we're doing, just dronedeliverycanada.com as well.
Well, Michael, thanks for coming. Really appreciated the next step in the entrepreneurial journey, if you like, and I think that it'll be an interesting listen for someone. So thank you, and thanks everyone for listening. Till next time, this is Canada's podcast. See you soon.
Thank you.